Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, October 21st, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Israel has killed 80 since the Gaza ceasefire went into effect. So Gaza's health ministry said on Monday that Israeli forces have killed at least 80 Palestinians and wounded 303 since October 11th, the day after the ceasefire went into effect. The health ministry said that a total of 45 bodies of Palestinians killed by Israeli attacks were brought to hospitals over the previous 24-hour period, and this was most, if not all of them, died on Sunday, when Israel unleashed a wave of airstrikes across Gaza. They launched over 100 airstrikes after alleging that Israeli troops came under attack in Rafah, southern Gaza. As we mentioned yesterday, a senior administration official told Kurt Mills of the American Conservative that Hamas did not violate the ceasefire, and what actually happened was an Israeli tank hit an unexploded IED that has probably been there for months. We also had the report from Ryan Grimm of Dropsite News. Sources told him that it was actually an Israeli bulldozer operated by a private company that was demolishing homes in Rafah that hit an unexploded bomb or an IED that was planted there. And I actually did the Matt Gaetz show with Ryan a few hours ago. It aired, and he detailed his reporting a bit more. And according to his reporting, the White House was aware that this was the case and that Israel was using it as an excuse to increase the bombing. And they also announced they're going to cut off all the aid. And it was because of White House pressure that they reversed that decision and then announced on Sunday night, that they were going to go back to the enforcing the ceasefire. And the IDF announced on Sunday, as I mentioned, that the heavy bombardment was over, basically. That's essentially what that announcement meant. But the IDF killed 2 more Palestinians on Monday inside Gaza. I actually saw later in the day, I should update this, the Gaza Civil Defense said that a total of 4 Palestinians were killed on Monday. And it looks like both these instances was Israel claimed, they crossed the so-called yellow line, which is the line that Israeli troops withdrew to. And it's not clearly marked on the ground. It's not marked at all on the ground. And how do we know that? Because Israel said on Monday that they started marking it by putting big yellow concrete blocks 200 meters apart. So this is how they're marking the line, by putting these blocks along it. And if anyone crosses it, that means they get killed. But the line has not been marked up to this point. And even like putting blocks 200 meters apart, 200 meters is pretty far. I mean, if you don't have a clear line of sight, you could easily miss a block like that. And the situation here, I know, especially in Gaza City, is you have IDF troops in some of the neighborhoods, in the eastern parts of the neighborhoods, and people returning and trying to see the condition of their homes. And if they stray too far, then that means that the IDF can kill them. So this is kind of what has become the status quo now since this ceasefire deal went into effect on October 10th, which I think is really more like a de-escalation deal, of course, because the Israeli occupation continues and we see this daily violence happening. And they've also been working to dig bodies out of the rubble. The health ministry said that since October 11th, 426 bodies have been recovered, and there's something like 10,000 people reported missing, presumed dead under the rubble. All right, so the next one here. This is an interesting story. The CIA told Witkoff that Hamas did not want a ceasefire deal. So U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff revealed in a 60-minute interview that aired Sunday that the CIA was telling him Hamas did not want to agree to the Gaza ceasefire deal in the days leading up to the group accepting the U.S. proposal. Witkoff, who was interviewed alongside President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, said the Arab countries mediating the negotiations were telling him Hamas would respond positively, while the CIA was telling him the opposite. So Witkoff said, quote, "We were getting word from the mediators that they were going to come out positive, but with a couple of conditions and different things that they wanted to see modified in any final agreement. But the vibe we were getting was quite positive." And we were hearing that Hamas was positive on the deal, and yet I was reading intelligence reports every day and getting briefings from the CIA 3 times a day. And those intelligence briefings were suggesting that Hamas was going to say no, end quote. So I think that's interesting. It's almost like the CIA was just trying to discourage Witkoff, from and Kushner from pursuing this and pursuing, more negotiations with Hamas. Witkoff said that despite the U.S. intelligence reports, he and Kushner thought the talks were going in a positive direction. He said, quote, "We really felt that this was going in a positive way. And sure enough, Hamas came out and said, we accept the president's plan, and that allowed us to get into the next gear," end quote. So while there are many uncertainties about the prospects for a long-term deal and not all the details have been worked out, Kushner said that Hamas was clear that they were on board with releasing the hostages and that they wanted to end the war. Hamas's long-standing position was that it was willing to release all remaining Israeli captives in exchange for a full Israeli withdrawal and a permanent ceasefire. And they made a very significant concession by agreeing to release all the hostages without a full Israeli withdrawal, because we see what's happening, the reality on the ground. It's like the West Bank style occupation, but much worse, because you have the whole place is just decimated and people don't know where they can go, where they can't go. So Witkoff and Kushner are currently in Israel discussing implementing the ceasefire deal with Israeli officials. Vice President J.D. Vance, he's probably arrived there by now, but he left on Monday to go to Israel. And the thing is, Israel is going to the Israeli government is going to keep trying to blow up this deal. And it's going to take a lot of involvement. The way that they're kind of going about it, we saw when Trump went and spoke to the Knesset, he said, Netanyahu is, you guys should pardon Netanyahu. Witkoff and Kushner were praising Netanyahu. So I don't think this approach, is really going to work. I think the better approach would be cutting them off and telling them, you're on your own unless you make peace or something like that. Because I think this is going to eventually get to the point. I think the status quo in Gaza right now could last for a while. That's something Ryan Grimm said on the Matt Gaetz show, was that he thinks it's too soon because Trump really put a lot of his credibility on the line here with this deal, that it's too soon for him to let Israel completely blow it up. But unfortunately, I feel like it is only just a matter of time. And that time could take a long time, but just a matter of time before the Israeli government gets its way and resumes the full-scale bombing. All right, so the next one here, Trump threatens Hamas with eradication if it doesn't behave. So President Trump said on Monday that Hamas must behave in Gaza or the Palestinian group would be eradicated, echoing similar threats he has made since the ceasefire deal was signed. The president told reporters in the White House, quote, "We made a deal with Hamas that they're going to be very good, they're going to behave, they're going to be nice, and if not, we're going to eradicate them if we have to," end quote. Trump suggested that Israel was eager to restart its genocidal war if he gave the word. He said, quote, "Israel would go in 2 minutes if I asked them. I could tell them, go in and take care of it. But right now, we haven't said that. We're going to give it a little chance," end quote. His comments came a day after Israel unleashed heavy airstrikes across Gaza, and he didn't have any words about that, And he also accused Hamas of violating the ceasefire. But one thing he said that was interesting, he said this both on Sunday and Monday, was that he suggested, he didn't question Israel's claim that IDF troops were attacked by Palestinian militants on Sunday. But what he did say is, we think it was not the leadership that did this. It was a couple of rebels. It was how he put it on Sunday. And then he made a similar comment on Monday. And I think it is clear, if the Israeli story is true, if they were attacked by militants, that Hamas, if Hamas didn't want this ceasefire deal to happen, they wouldn't have released all the hostages. I think they clearly have more incentive for this deal to actually work. So, either way, Israel clearly used the incident to try to just completely blow everything up and just those massacres across Gaza. I should have mentioned the first story there, the picture story that we saw was a man carrying a very small child in a blanket who was killed by the strikes on Sunday. It was the same things we've saw for the past 2 years. Strikes on tents, on shelters and things, and children among the dead and wounded. All right, so the next one here, U.S. envoy threatens major Israeli war in Lebanon. So this one is from Jason Ditz. So U.S. Ambassador to Turkey, Tom Barrack, is once again threatening Lebanon with war, this time from Israel, if they fail to meet U.S. demands to fully disarm Hezbollah. He suggested that even hesitation would inevitably lead to a major war with Israel and dire consequences. And this is not the first time Barrack has threatened Lebanon with war. Back in July, he suggested that both Israel and Syria would conquer them and carve up the territory of Lebanon if they did not give in. And he later threatened to withdraw the Lebanon file from U.S. diplomatic priorities entirely. He also gave Lebanon a 90-day deadline to disarm Hezbollah and claimed Israel made up that deadline. So underpinning the threat of an Israeli attack on Lebanon is the fact that Israel is already actively attacking Lebanon, and they've increased the bombing over the past week or so. So this is not an idle threat if you're in Lebanon. This is a very real threat. And, if the Lebanese state, if the National Army tried to disarm Hezbollah, I mean, that could lead to a civil war. So if you're in Beirut right now and you're getting all these demands, you're looking at the possibility of a civil war or another war with Israel. So they're really not in a good position here, and the U.S. is just completely taking the Israeli side here. All right, so the next one here, U.S. to keep troops at Ain al-Asad Air Base in western Iraq. So U.S. troops will remain at the Ain al-Asad Air Base in western Iraq, reversing plans to withdraw from the military installation, Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani said on Monday. So according to Stars and Stripes, al-Sudani said that about 250 to 350 U.S. military personnel will remain at Ain al-Asad as well as at the Al-Harir Air Base in the Erbil Governorate in northern Iraq's Kurdistan region. A U.S. War Department official said earlier this month, which we covered, that the U.S. was in the process of withdrawing from Ain al-Asad and that the U.S. planned to keep the majority of its troops in Erbil and was leaving some military personnel in Baghdad. But they were saying they were going to totally pull out of this base as part of this drawdown. The U.S. is not withdrawing from Iraq. This kind of has been misreported, this deal that the U.S. and Iraq signed last year as a withdrawal deal, but that's not what it is. It's the U.S. technically ending its anti-ISIS mission in Iraq and changing the role that U.S. troops have. That's what they say, but essentially it's just maintaining the U.S. presence and withdrawing a few hundred troops. They're saying that they're bringing the troop numbers down from 2,500 to under 2,000. So who knows exactly how many U.S. troops will be left. But again, it's not a full withdrawal. And al-Sudani said that the U.S. troops will stay at Ain al-Asad to help forces fighting ISIS in Syria. He said, quote, "These personnel will assist in surveillance and coordination with U.S. forces at the Al-Tanf base in Syria to ensure that ISIS does not exploit the security vacuum," end quote. So this is... al-Sudani last year in 2024, when Biden was bombing Iraqi militias in response to the rocket attacks on U.S. bases, which were being launched in response to U.S. support for Israel's genocide in Gaza, al-Sudani, he was doing it against the will of the Iraqi government. They were bombing specifically the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is actually part of the Iraqi security forces. So al-Sudani said he wanted the U.S. out. They wanted an end to the foreign coalition, the anti-ISIS coalition. They entered negotiations, and they ended up with a deal that basically doesn't change that much. And this is something this is a pattern that has repeated itself basically for a while, and as long as I've been tracking it closely like this, since the U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general, in Baghdad in 2020. There was an Iranian parliament vote for the U.S. to get out. They were trying to negotiate some kind of deal. And a few times, I think this might be the third time that they say, oh, well, we're ending our combat mission in Iraq. Now we're just advisors. And, they've done that like a few times already. So the U.S. will remain in Iraq. And the U.S. has enormous leverage over Iraq. It controls its money. It could sanction the economy into the dirt if it chooses to. All right, so the next one here, more sectarian killings hit central Syria, 8 Alawites killed. This article is from The Cradle. So the Homs government in central Syria is witnessing a wave of sectarian violence, both from attacks by unknown gunmen targeting members of the Alawite religious minority and from the torture and killings of Alawites in Syrian government prisons. At least 8 have been killed in the government over the past 3 days, including 7 on sectarian grounds and 2 women, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported on October 20th. Some 359 people have been killed in Homs since the beginning of the year as a result of the chaos that has plagued the city since former ISIS and al-Qaeda commander Ahmed al-Shara took power in Damascus. The observatory said that these developments, coupled with continued official silence, raise growing fears of a widening sectarian rift and a threat to what remains of the city's social cohesion. So this is in Homs, and there is also in western Syria, in Latakia, in those areas in March, there was the big massacres where at least 1,400 Alawite civilians were massacred by government-linked fighters. And these sectarian killings have continued, just at a smaller scale, and they get basically no media attention. And this is the government that the U.S., Israel, and Turkey essentially installed into power. All right, so the next one here, Trump is in spat with Colombia over boat strikes. So President Trump has issued a statement attacking Colombian President Gustavo Petro after the Latin American leader accused the U.S. of murder for bombing a boat in Colombian waters. On Saturday, Petro said that a U.S. strike on a boat in September killed a Colombian fisherman who had no ties to the drug trade. He said, quote, U.S. government officials have committed a murder and violated our sovereignty and territorial waters. Fisherman Alejandro Carranza had no ties to the drug trade, and his daily activity was fishing. The Colombian boat was adrift and had its distress signal up due to an engine failure. We await explanations from the U.S. government, end quote. The Trump administration has offered no evidence to back up its claims about who it's bombing or what the boats are carrying that they're bombing. And a day after Petro's comments, Trump accused him of being a drug leader and vowed that he would cut aid to Colombia, which has been a long-time close partner and ally of the U.S. It's a major non-NATO ally. That's something that Biden declared in 2022. So this is Trump's big post, long post on Truth Social. He said, quote, President Gustavo Petro of Colombia is an illegal drug leader, strongly encouraging the massive production of drugs in big and small fields all over Colombia. It has become the biggest business in Colombia by far, and Petro does nothing to stop it, despite large-scale payments and subsidies from the USA that are nothing more than a long-term rip-off of America. As of today, these payments or any other form of payment or subsidies will no longer be made to Colombia, end quote. Trump added that Petro, quote, better close up these killing fields immediately, or the United States will close them up for him, and it won't be done nicely, end quote. In response to Trump's comments, Colombia withdrew its ambassador from Washington, and Colombia's Interior Ministry said that the U.S. president's remarks were a threat of invasion or military action against Colombia. In another post on X, Petro blamed the cocaine trafficking in Colombia on consumption in the U.S., and said his government had taken a lot of action against the cocaine trade. He said, quote, during the years of my government when the greatest effort was made against drug traffickers, halting the expansion of coca leaf cultivation, which now only grew by 3% in 2024, and half of the crops for the past 3 years have been abandoned in the jungle, as the UN report states, and we have seized more than 2,800 tons of cocaine as never before in history, end quote. The left-wing leader has previously clashed with Trump about military deportation flights, and he's been very critical of Israel's genocidal war in Gaza, going as far as calling for an international armed force to stop it when he was speaking at the UN General Assembly. He also addressed pro-Palestine protesters in New York. And when he's discussing Gaza and everything, he said that U.S. troops should disobey orders from the president, which prompted the Trump administration to revoke his visa. Petro has also rejected the U.S. push toward an attempt at regime change in Venezuela. So things are heating up here. And again, this is a long-time U.S. ally, so this is pretty significant, the things that are going down here. The U.S. just bombing boats that leave Colombia. And again, just not showing any evidence or anything to back up the claims. And the next one here, officials and locals undercut Trump claims about Venezuela drug boats. So this article is from the Washington Post, and it's about kind of the main thing here that I want to mention about this report is that according to local officials and U.S. officials as well, the route that the U.S. has been targeting from Venezuela to Trinidad and Tobago is not drug shipments that go to the U.S. It says a lot of it is cocaine that goes to Europe or West Africa. This says there's becoming a big market in West Africa for cocaine, and also marijuana that is brought to Trinidad to be sold there, as far as I understand this. And apparently some of these shipments could be marijuana, could be weed shipments that they're blowing up. And you have Trump claiming that the latest one he did, he claimed it was fentanyl. But there's no fentanyl coming from Venezuela, according to all the numbers, DEA, UN numbers. It's just not, it's just a lie, this idea that they're targeting fentanyl with these boat strikes. So this article gets into some of the claims and made by the Trump administration. But again, this route that they've been targeting, they claim that these drugs are on the way to the U.S. And this is just not true, according to the officials quoted in this story. All right, so the next one here, Rubio and Lavrov speak ahead of Trump-Putin meeting. So this one's from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov spoke on the phone Monday. Rubio and Lavrov may meet on Thursday. Said that they had a constructive discussion, according to the Foreign Ministry, and they're discussing specific steps in the interests of implementing the understanding reached on October 16th between Trump and Putin. And so this is, again, they're laying the groundwork for this next Putin-Trump summit, which I think is expected to happen within the next 2 weeks in Budapest, Hungary. So hopefully this leads to some kind of progress toward peace. It's hard to be optimistic about it just because you just never know how things are going to go here, especially with Trump. But hopefully leads to some kind of peace deal. All right, so the next one, I left the one up yesterday about Trump telling Zelensky to accept Russia's terms for a peace deal. And then the last story here, Trump says that China does not want to invade Taiwan. So President Trump said on Monday that he doesn't think China wants to invade Taiwan and expressed optimism about reaching a trade deal with Beijing, despite his recent threat to increase tariff in response to China's rare earth export restrictions. So Trump said, quote, "I think we'll be just fine with China. China doesn't want to do that." And he's referring to invade Taiwan. As it pertains to Taiwan, and that doesn't mean it's not the apple of his eye, because probably it is, but I don't see anything happening, end quote. The president's comments contradict claims from U.S. War Secretary Pete Hegseth, who said earlier this year that the threat China poses to Taiwan could be imminent, and for years the Pentagon has been claiming that China was preparing to be ready to invade by 2027. But that claim has never been confirmed by Beijing. That was always based on U.S. intelligence claims by the CIA and stuff. And I think a lot of people think that actually, like, she has said that has ordered the military to do that, but there's no evidence of that. And according to reporting, I think from Defense News, during one of Biden's meetings with Xi, he said, "Where are you guys coming up with this 2027 idea? That we don't have these plans." But that just goes all over the place. So it's interesting to see Trump say that he doesn't think they're going to invade, and he is going to meet with Xi Jinping later this month on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in South Korea, and he believes that he can work out a deal before the 100% tariffs on Chinese goods are supposed to take effect in November. He said, quote, "I think when we finish our meeting in South Korea, China and I will have a really fair and really great trade deal together," end quote. So again, it's the same with Trump. I mean, just who knows? It's just the other day, he's like tariffs and all the rhetoric against China, very critical of China. And now he's saying, yeah, I think we're going to get along. It'll all be great. But I think the Taiwan thing is interesting because, again, that goes against all the claims we've seen over the past few years from the Pentagon. And also, we have not seen Trump say that he would defend Taiwan or anything like that. So he's kind of moving back to the strategic ambiguity. And I do think, as we said, we joined some other organizations in a letter to Trump saying that to make a deal with China, you should reaffirm, de-escalate military tensions by, going back to that strategic ambiguity. And I'm sure that is possibly on the, part of these negotiations as well. So we'll see what happens. And Trump made these comments on Monday while he was hosting Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese at the White House. So he was downplaying the threat of China invading Taiwan, but he did also endorse AUKUS, which is a military pact between the U.S., the UK, and Australia meant to counter Beijing that focuses on technology sharing and will arm Canberra with nuclear-powered submarines. And that deal is just, if you're Australian and your government is I would be very upset at my government for entering this deal. I forget the number, but it's just a huge astronomical number that Australia is going to spend to get a few of these nuclear-powered submarines. But anyway, they're saying they're going to go through with it. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Mahmoud Mushtaha. Gaza must decide its own political future before the world does for us. One from Dan Steinbach. Israelis scramble for Gaza's gas reserves. One from Jonathan Cook. It was never a Gaza war. The ceasefire is a lie cut from the same cloth. One from Jose Nino. 30 years of failure. How U.S.-Venezuela relations spiraled into military confrontation. And one from Kelly Vlahos. How little Marco became Trump's biggest asset in Latin America. So please go check all that out. Lots of stuff to read at antiwar.com, even if you watch this show. But please like, subscribe, comment, and follow us on social media. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.